Fishtrap. Every winter since 2006, Fishtrap has hosted a community read, either through the NEA's Big Read program, or sometimes we get to choose a book we think is going to especially resonate with our own community. And this winter, we are excited to present a book by longtime friend of Fishtrap, Molly Glass, The Jump Off Creek. The Jump Off Creek is a powerful story of homesteader Lydia Sanderson and her struggle to settle in the mountains of Oregon in the 1890s. The Jump Off Creek gives readers an up-close look at the hardships of frontier life and a courageous woman determined to survive. Already this winter, Fishtrap has provided more than 400 free books and learning resources to schools and libraries in Wallowa and Union Counties. This is largely, and I mean this so gratefully, and thanks to all of you who make donations to Fishtrap each year, but also to the 2023 Fishtrap sponsors, including the Book Loft, Community Bank, Oregon Arts Commission, and Pacific Power Foundation. I'd also like to call out our program partners this year, the Joseph Enterprise and Wallowa School Districts and Libraries, Building Healthy Families, the National Historic Oregon Trail Interpretive Center, the LeGrand School District, Arts Center East, who is about to celebrate their 46th birthday this week or next week, the Eastern Oregon University Library, the Cook Memorial Library, and the Historic Union Community Hall. We've got lots of friends everywhere. I hope you were able to tune into Molly's kickoff presentation last week. If not, never fear, all Fishtrap Reads videos will be available to view afterwards, so you can watch them anytime in your classroom, at your library, book club, or at the dinner table. Just visit fishtrap.org to see all the free events and resources that you can take in over the next month, including reader's guides and little games and all sorts of things. All right, now it's time to welcome back Molly Glass to the Fishtrap Zoom network. Molly Glass is the author of several novels in addition to The Jump Off Creek, including The Dazzle of Day, Wildlife, The Hearts of Horses, Falling from Horses, as well as this story collection, Unforeseen. She writes both realistic fiction and science fiction, and her work has received, among other honors, a Penn West Fiction Prize, an Oregon Book Award, 2 Pacific Northwest Booksellers Awards, the James Tiptree Jr. Award, and Winning Writers Award. Molly is a 4th-generation Oregonian and comes to us today again from her home in Portland. Welcome, Molly.
Thanks, Shannon. Great introduction.
You bet. Thank you for joining us, and I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I guess, are we okay? Yeah. Okay, here we go. I'll just jump right in, okay? I think I must have been about, I don't know, 14, 15, 16 when I read Shane for the first time. A few years ago, I would have been sure that everybody in my audience would know what I was talking about. Maybe not Jack Schaefer's novel, but for sure the movie Shane. But I've learned that I can't count on that anymore. So here's a little summary. Shane is set in the classic landscape of paperback Westerns during the post-Civil War rush of homesteaders into the West, 1889 Wyoming Territory. It's narrated by the homesteader's young son, Bob Sterrett. The Sterrett homestead and the homesteads of their neighbors have staked claims on the open range that until lately had been used by a cattleman named Luke Fletcher. Shane is a mysterious stranger who rides into and later out of the lives of the Sterrett family. He's quiet. He's always silent about his past. He does not wear a gun, and yet everyone seems to understand that he is a dangerous man. The boy's father, Joe Sterrett, hires Shane as a hand on his farm, and Shane puts aside his, I'm going to say gunslinger garb, his silk handkerchief, his black clothes, and he buys dungarees. The homesteaders are a small community of farmers. Fletcher is a powerful, wealthy man with a large herd of cattle. He's trying to gain access to the open range again by pushing out the homesteaders. So Shane, of course, helps Sterrett and the neighbors hold fast against Fletcher and his hired men. But in the end, Shane has to strap on his guns again, and he goes into the saloon, one against many, and afterward rides away wounded and alone into the dark night as the boy calls after him, "Come back, Shane. Shane, come back." There is a Charles Schulz cartoon I'm very fond of, Charlie Brown sitting in front of a television set watching that scene, sadly lamenting, Shane never did come back. It's our classic American myth. A man with a dark past comes out of the Wild West where his strength of character was forged and where he has learned how to fight and shoot. He would give up his guns if he could, but we need him to save us from the bad guys. And so he does the necessary killing, and then he heads back into the wilderness alone. Like countless other gunslinger heroes, his success is freighted with sorrow because he has wearied of violence, but he cannot escape it. And ironically, in Shane, as in so many Western novels, the fight that he wages is on behalf of the farmers, the homesteaders who are putting up fences and closing off the open range that has been the domain of free-spirited wanderers and footloose paladins like him. In the elegiac world of the Western novel, our wilderness paradise is always just about to end, despite and because of the sacrifice of our gunslinger hero, the taming of the West that will make him an anachronism. This story is seen through the eyes of a young boy, a boy puzzled and entranced by Shane's hidden violence, a boy who comes to trust, love, and venerate him. Jack Schaefer said about his novel, "It's an American boy's dream of the world as it should be." I've gone back to reread Shane many times over the years, and I've each time seen it through a different lens. By the time I was 20, I had read all the classic literature of the West, from the Virginian to Honey in the Horn. And then the women, Willa Cather, Mari Sandos, Dorothy Johnson, women who told a somewhat different story about the West, a story not so much about heroes as about ordinary people and the way their lives were tied to the land. I read the homesteaders' memoirs, the trail drive reminiscences, the diaries and letters of the early comers, and I learned, among other things, that the real history of the West wasn't a history of lone riders and solitary gun-toting heroes, but a communal enterprise. And finally, I read the memoirs of riders who were third or fourth generation on their families' ranches, who had begun to ask what it was we thought we were conquering when we won the West. Myths are not lies. They're the stories we tell ourselves about the past so we can try to understand who we are as a people, what we care about, how to conduct ourselves. They're larger than life. They're legends about heroes and heroic battles. They're mostly about men. We're a young country. We haven't got Beowulf, Odysseus, Galahad to hark back to. We've got this natural, normal, understandable hunger for a heroic past. So we look to the only period of our Anglo history that comes anywhere close to a heroic age, those 25 or 30 years when we were pushing our way into the West. And ironically, pushing out the Indian peoples, the very people whose own legends and heroic myths might have given us the stories we yearned for. The American West is arguably a landscape more beautiful and vast and rugged than anything on the East Coast or in the South or even in the Old Country. In America's mythic story of the West, The trappers, the cowboys, the settlers, out on the plains or in the mountains, far removed from doctors, stores, policemen, had no choice but to solve their own problems. Shoe their own horses, repair their own wagon wheels, hang their own criminals. Westerners in this story wore leather and packed guns. And it was this mythic struggle against the Western wilderness that shaped the American character, so the myth tells us, made us as a people free-thinking, fearless, tough, self-reliant, independent. The myth of the West and the Western hero of countless novels and films defines who we are as Americans, both in our own minds and in the perception of much of the rest of the world. The mountain man, the cowboy, the gunslinger have filled the same role for us as King Arthur and his knights in English mythology. And they're the center of our storytelling, even now with the Western seemingly in decline. The gunslinger, the mountain man, the cowboy have simply moved downtown and into outer space. They've put on the clothes of the hard-boiled detective, the go-it-alone rule-breaking cop, the vigilante hero, the superhero. From John Wayne to John Wick, from the cowboys in Louis L'Amour to the private eyes in Lee Child's novels, from Bruce Willis in Die Hard to Keanu Reeves in Speed, from the Terminator to Han Solo. Such men have long been our cultural heroes, and they are still shooting it out with the bad guys in the mean streets of New York and Boston and LA and Tatooine. They have gone to virtual worlds and outer space where the same old story is being reenacted by Arnold Schwarzenegger as an android Shane protecting the boy and his mother from the younger, stronger, faster on the draw gunmen from out of town. And that cowboy hero in all his modern iterations, as he came to be embodied in novels and in films, is the central image of our American myth. Shane and all his successors is a rootless loner, lacking family ties, a childhood history. He has neither parents nor siblings. He's one in a long line of American fictional heroes who prize their independence and their wandering of the obligations of community. Men who have chosen loneliness and isolation over the embrace of family. Quoting from the novel now, Shane was a man who seemed to come from nowhere and appeared equally determined to pass on to nowhere. The cowboy myth is in some respects one of an endless childhood. The hero has no parents and is not himself a parent, nor does he wish to be. He does not marry because marriage would mean the end of his picaresque adventures. In the myth of the West, our hero rides his horse across unfenced golden fields, spreads his bedroll beside unpolluted mountain streams, wakes in the pink light of dawn to see deer browsing on the meadow with his white stallion. In this story, he's both intimate with the wild earth and he is the one who has tamed it. You have seen this story unfolding in every advertisement for an off-road SUV. The West in this story comprises Montana and the High Rockies, Monument Valley, Utah, and the nameless hidden canyons of Zane Grey novels. The West of this story is never a nuclear waste dump in Eastern Washington. It's not the Las Vegas Strip or the smoggy sprawl of modern Phoenix. It's not deadbeat dads or road rage or a boy shooting up his high school. It's not the raging poverty and alcoholism of the res. And it's not the gangbangers dishing out vigilante justice in the streets of East LA. Yet the cowboy hero brought these things west with him as surely as he brought his horse and his gun. Myths too often tell us who to love or to hate, whether to see or to be blind. Often, too often, myths are the stories that saddle us, ride us, whip us onward, and they tell us what to do, and we do it without questioning. We haven't wanted to think too hard about the paradoxes and ambivalences of Western American settlement, or look too closely at the baleful shadows in the Western myth, the dark side of the cowboy hero. How are we to understand our lives in this place where we live if we can no longer believe in the old narratives that have figured so large in American life, the uncomplicated stories in which our perseverance and our endurance of hardships led to a noble settlement of the West? People came into the West thinking they'd been promised something, at least freedom and the possibility of starting a new life. When things didn't work out or neighbors got too close, they moved farther west to try again, or to seek a new challenge or new land to break. But of course, our expectation of golden riches, golden dreams out west often led to disappointment. Land was open for homesteading, even where the ground was unsuitable for plowing, even where there was insufficient rainfall, no possibility of irrigation. The dry land west is littered with the rotting shacks of abandoned homesteads. When the timber was cut or burned, when the soil had been exhausted, when the game was killed off, when the claim petered out, or the crops dried up, or the cows had eaten the grass down to its roots, people packed up and headed farther west, following a trail they hoped would lead them to new and better opportunities. But it was not the miners who struck pay dirt, it was the mining corporations, not the loggers, but the lumber barons. And often the cowboy was not an armed nobleman on horseback, but an overworked, underpaid wage slave for an absentee English cattle baron or an Eastern investment corporation. Just as now, the Western wanderers of the film Nomadland are seasonal workers in a vast Amazon warehouse. And as people used up the land and moved on, they left a backwash of the defeated and discouraged. When the Western story didn't come true, the result was alienation. The poor you will always have with you, Jesus may have said, but in the American West, poverty was viewed as a failure of the dream, and we are reaping that whirlwind now. My own writing from the Jump Off Creek onward has been shaped by a lifetime of affection for and frustration with Western literature and the American heroic myth. I've had to come to terms with the knowledge that our Western story, the story I loved so much when I was 16, is a story of breaking the wild land, its animals, its native peoples, by brutal, violent conquest. The Western belief that a man should be free to do what he wants to do with his own land, insistence on freedom regardless of the cost to the community, I now know has been the rationale for more than a century of overgrazing, clear-cutting, suburban sprawl, hydraulic dredging, pit mining, has been the rationale for Las Vegas, Nevada, sitting on the driest landscape of the West to drain down the Colorado River and the underground Western aquifers in order to put on its watery casino displays and keep green its acres of improbable manicured English lawns. And of course, our mythic history takes no notice of Indian genocide, vigilantism, brutalities against the Mexicans, the Chinese. Above all, I have recognized that the Western story solves every problem with violence. Our hero shooting his way out of trouble, out of the most difficult problems with both guns blazing. There's usually a moment in Westerns where he has an opportunity to turn back, to seek help, to admit pain and weakness, to ask for another way out. The desperate situation usually has an alternative, If only the hero would admit his own vulnerability and fallibility. But our hero lives by the code of the West. If he's insulted or cheated, if his hat is knocked off his head and tromped on, he must fight or he's a coward. If his horse is stolen, or now it would be his car, a Mustang surely, or a Silverado, our hero, above the law, dispenses his own violent justice and punishment. Toxic masculinity is a feature of patriarchy around the world, but in America, it is Shane I have seen, hanging out with the Proud Boys and the sovereign citizen movement. I certainly have seen him walking the halls of Congress. We're in love with Shane, but he's the guy our mothers warned us against. I am not the only writer now looking harder at the old myth of the Western, the story trying to be true to a West that never existed, the stories about gunslingers and cowboys and savages. Craig Leslie and Betty Lynch Husted and Kent Harriff are among the writers I know exploring the emotional truth of life in the West. Jane Kirkpatrick's stories keep the values of the old myth, the courage, the self-reliance, the toughness, but tell stories in which those values are informed and mindful. The recent novels of S.M. Hulse and Rebecca Claren have looked hard at the human place on the Western landscape today, the damage we've done and are doing, and the women and men looking for a way toward redemption. Ursula Le Guin and Kim Stanley Robinson have imagined new myths that show us how we might live generation after generation respectfully on this land. These are among the writers whose storytelling helps us understand who we are in the world, helps us think in fresh ways about ourselves as we might become, instead of reinforcing our old notions of the brave, tough cowboy we think we ought to be. They're telling stories about the Western lives of women as well as men, stories of Indigenous people, people of every ethnic and cultural and religious tribe, heroic stories not of lone gunmen, but of the small towns that can be found everywhere in the West, where the relations of people to the land are the most direct and intense, and where some of the people have roots that go back for generations. Stories of kinship between people and the courage of ordinary lives, even in terrible circumstances, even in the face of intolerance and ignorance. Stories in which personal freedom is a noble dream, but only if it includes a sense of responsibility and independence that gives us strength, but not when it means cutting our ties to family and community. We are all of us, these writers, as I think of it, writing stories to persuade Shane that the cowboy life doesn't have to be so lonesome and bloody. I imagine Shane one day pulling a book out of his saddlebag, one of mine maybe, even the Jump Off Creek, and beginning to read. I imagine him beginning to care about the people in those pages and beginning to feel part of those communities, beginning to question the story he's always been told about what it means to be a hero, about who he is, how to conduct himself, what kind of person he might become. I even try to imagine that he might one day become a storyteller himself, might turn his own story into a great legend of place, of peacemaking, of adaptation to the land and its animals, instead of a story about a wandering warrior who solves problems with his gun and then disappears into the heart of darkness. And in this story I'm imagining, one day he hangs up his 6-shooter for good. Thank you all for listening to that highly opinionated piece of writing.
That's what we need, Molly. I am so grateful. There was so much that you said that I want to comment on later, but we should probably do that over coffee. I want to thank you for joining us today, and I am stumbling as I find my notes. So this is live, folks. Here we are. This is proof. I do want to, before I send Molly on her way, I want to thank her again for coming here. I also want to acknowledge something that she said right before we came on, which was acknowledging how strange it is to do these live stream presentations and not see your audience talk back. And so I want to encourage you folks that that are watching this now or watch it later on, and thank you for all of you who've tuned in, to send your comments and suggestions and ideas or feedback to us at Fishtrap. You can just email us at info@fishtrap.org or contact us on social media. We'd also be happy to pass on anything to Molly that you would like to share. That is a strange thing about this particular format. So you also may notice as we're talking here that you're seeing other folks at the table as at Fishtrap. So if you'd like to join us next Wednesday at noon and take a step back in time and learn about a day in the life of a woman on her homestead, you can do that both at home, online, or in your classrooms, or later. Or if you want to join us here at Fishtrap and watch it together, we can do that and have a little comment afterwards. So again, next week, you'll visit with Elizabeth as she unpacks her wagon and finds that things are not going as exactly as she expected. Again, you can take it online, watch the recording afterwards, or join us here at noon. We'll have snackies, I promise. Following each 30-minute screening, we'll share our thoughts and reflections on what we've just seen and how they relate to the Jump Off Creek. Again, thank you for joining us today. Learn more about this book, all of the resources that are available in our upcoming events at fishtrap.org, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.